Welcome to another episode of the Plant Podcast, the number one podcast focused on emerging industrial thin client technology and manufacturing visualization. My name is Brian. The Plant is brought to you by ThinManager Software, the global leader in thin client management and industrial mobility solutions. ThinManager is a Rockwell automation technology. We're celebrating 4 years of making this podcast, and that is truly exciting. We've had many great guests on the show, and for all our subscribers, thank you. Factory automation and production in general has been around for a long time, but as our world evolves and grows, the tools, practices, and people must also change and adapt, and that's what we're all about. I'm pretty excited about our guest today. It is a little strange that he hasn't been on the show before. Todd Garmon is a commercial engineer at Rockwell Automation and the ThinManager team. He has helped to facilitate the integration and use of ThinManager in almost countless customer installs. He knows intimately the challenges faced from the system integrators down to the end user when using and learning ThinManager. Also joining me today to talk to Todd is Tom Jordan, the marketing lead at Rockwell Automation for the ThinManager team. Welcome to another episode of The Plant. I'm joined today by Todd Garmon, commercial engineer at Rockwell Automation and longtime member of our ThinManager team, as well as Tom Jordan, marketing lead at Rockwell Automation and ThinManager. All right, so Todd, getting going as I get everybody to do, tell us a little bit about like your history and how, you got to where you are with ThinManager and career and all that kind of stuff. Give us a little background.
Sure. It's kind of weird. I wasn't even looking for a job at the time with anything in automation or whatever. I was looking for work, but prior to even joining the ThinManager team, my whole background was more on the commercial front, doing data center migrations, disaster recovery kind of things and that kind of stuff. And then ended up meeting Matt, because our kids were in a musical together, and next thing you know, I'm interviewing with Tom and getting a job at ThinManager. But no, it's been a really cool ride. I didn't really know much in the way of the industrial automation side, because like I say, most of my background was more from a commercial front and those kind of things. But when I saw and came in and actually saw the product, what ThinManager was, I was really shocked and kind of surprised, because I saw a lot of applications where I could have already used it in some of the banking industry and things like that I was involved in. Thought it was a really cool product. And so that was back in 2010. So I've been with ThinManager since 2010. As far as the job and the role and those kind of things, it's morphed a lot over time. But it's definitely been a fun ride to see the growth that's happening. Because at that point in time when I came on, we were just launching 4.0, so I'm still trying to understand the differences between version 3.3 and 4.0 and all those kind of things. And so it was to see where it is now compared to where it was back then. It's a huge difference between the two, just as far as the number of features and capabilities and those kind of things. But it definitely was a different jump going from what I had been doing into this. But it's been a fun ride, nonetheless.
Yeah, I feel the same way. We were on version 6 when I started, and I feel like it's come so long. And so when you look at version 3 and 4, I'm sure it's even farther. And I feel like you have an interesting background here just because you've been in more than one department within the team. You've done some marketing and you've worked with partners and you've done training and, commercial engineering and a lot of demonstrations. So you've kind of have worn a lot of hats within the crew.
That I have. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so now you're in commercial engineering and, for the listeners, for their information and education, Todd does a lot of training, demonstrating actual customer setup and troubleshooting. So just while you've been in commercial engineering, like how has it changed as far as job function and what all does it entail?
Well, I mean, as far as the job itself, it's all of those things that you just mentioned. But as far as what it's changed, I think from where I first started to where we are now, you kind of have to put the hat on of, you know, when I say when I first started, when I'm talking about the role of commercial engineer, that all kind of came around with the acquisition, right, of Rockwell acquiring ThinManager. So in the very beginning, a lot of our time was really spent just trying to educate our own workforce within Rockwell about what ThinManager is and what it can do, and then continue to morph into what things we had already been doing as ACP back in the day of training systems integrators and distributors and stuff like that. So, but in the very beginning, it was really just more of that focus on trying to make sure that people within our own organization knew what ThinManager was and getting them to be evangelists, if you will, or at least getting that mind share out to those that didn't know as much about it. So in the very beginning, I was spending a lot of time in a lot of different places. Some of it was overseas and over in EMEA and other places, and the rest of it was here in the U.S. or Canada or down in Latin America. So it's definitely been a fun ride and an interesting one, to say the least, as far as that part's concerned. But a lot of what we do in the commercial engineering team is more generally pre-sales in our focus, and working with customers or working with other colleagues within the Rockwell organization or distributors, trying to help bring about some kind of a happy ending to a sale and those kind of things, when we're trying to kind of go in there and set things up for success, asking the customers certain questions to kind of figure out what problems they're trying to solve, and find out whether ThinManager fits that bill or not. And more often than not, that of course, obviously I can see how it will and where it can, but at the same time, the truth is ThinManager is not always the right fit for everybody. So we're going to be, I think when you look at us as a whole, we're always going to be a product that really stands out for what it is. But there are times where we're not the thing that somebody needs. And I think that also adds to the credibility for us when we can tell someone that, what you're looking for, while we can do a lot of things, it's not going to really cover exactly what you want to do. And the times where that happens is so far and few between, it's really not that big of a deal. Really.
I think it probably gives a lot of, credibility if you tell somebody that it's not the right solution for their individual setup at their company or whatever. Then down the line, that credibility, that honesty probably, comes back if they change their infrastructure or something like that, that they definitely believe what you're telling them at that point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're not just simply saying something to try to get money from them, right? You're looking out for their best interest too, not just your own bottom line. So it does add to that credibility. But like I say, the times that has happened has been very few and far between. And to your point, exactly, we've actually had some that, based off of what we've told them, they went, okay, well, we're going to go back and change what we're doing because we like all of these benefits and all these other things that that originally drew us to ThinManager and why we wanted to take advantage of it. But but the way our infrastructure was, it really wasn't going to be able to do it at first. Now we can. We're going to go make these changes so that we can utilize it. So I think there's a lot of validity in the fact of just being honest with people, and not over promising or overselling. But at the same time, I do get the desire, and I do like the fact in the commercial engineering side of things that we do get to talk to customers, and they'll bring up things that they want, challenges they're facing, or whatever, and we get to go talk to the development team and say, hey, is this a possibility? Could we make a change, or could we add something to ThinManager, or change the way this functions to accommodate this request? And I think that's one of the things I do enjoy a lot is being able to work with the dev team as a whole, and having that kind of role and working as a liaison, if you will, between the customer and the development team to kind of ask those questions because it's a lot of fun in that respect.
Todd, this is Tom. When it comes to that success, when a customer does latch on to ThinManager and make it part of their strategic plans for expansion or scaling up or whatnot, are there any things, any pieces of functionality or specific aspects of the platform that tend to come up more than others that drive those decisions?
I probably would say more often than not, I'm going to use it in a very generic way, the ease of use of what we do,
Mm-hmm.
the thin client replacement, the ease of ability to replace that device, in a really quick order, where you can, if a device, a thin client were to die, you can replace it within a couple of minutes. That's still a huge selling point. The way we do our high availability with failover and instant failover, those are still big, reasons for people to want to do anything with ThinManager. Um, so when you look, what's interesting is even with all the new things that ThinManager has added, there's still these very grounded uh, features that we've had for quite some time that still draw people in the most. It's not always the new cool, sexy, cool, great features that we throw out there.
Right.
And it's not that they don't have any value. It's just, it's really interesting. Those things that we have that are these new features, people still look back to what's always been the staple parts of ThinManager, and that's what really kind of catches their eye.
Yeah, reduced downtime, centralized management, those kind of things.
Exactly. So now, like even with containerized methodology that we can do, that's very specific for some people and what their needs are and how that might want to fit a need. But still, at the end of the day, they're looking for how easy can they configure a thin client? How quickly could they make a change to a configuration? The fact that they don't have to walk out to the plant floor to even affect that change, they can actually restart that device remotely from the ThinManager console. They don't have to go out on the plant floor. Whatever. It's just that those staple features that we've had for so long mean still probably the most to a lot of our customers, if not all of them.
Indeed, and I would think the remote capabilities have come in quite handy during COVID because, let's face it, we've all had to make some adjustments in our workspaces, and I'm sure our customers find it quite handy to be able to duplicate a configuration or have some information appear at a terminal that it previously was not at to allow for that distancing or whatnot that they may have to implement on their plant floor.
No, you're absolutely right. We've had more conversations in the past year about just remote access to a ThinManager system. There's because of the fact that they're needing that ability to manage the environment remotely, even more so. When I say remote, I don't mean in a traditional sense of what we might be thinking, remotely managing a thin client, in the fact that you're maybe a supervisor administrator sitting in the control room and you're managing something that's out on the plant floor. When I'm talking remote, and I think what you're saying too, is now you're sitting at home.
Yes.
And you're trying to find that way of getting in and what you can do and everything else. And can ThinManager still be a part of that? And while ThinManager doesn't have that direct, remote connection, so to speak, it's like we have a web-based, tool or anything like that at the moment or anything, but people are still wanting to know, well, how do I do this? And is this still a function? And it's like, well, there are certain things you can do. I mean, you could put ThinManager on your local device and then, point to it once you get connected over a VPN into your network and things like that. Assuming, once again, you've got all of the right things in place, ports, DCOM, all those things are set up properly, then yes, you could do it that way. But more often than not, I'm just telling people, just remote desktop into the actual server where ThinManager is hosted, make the changes there, and then you still have the visibility to everything you need to see at that point in time. But because of how things have changed so much over the past couple of years, it definitely is much more of a conversation piece. And we have people that are actually getting content. They're looking for content to obtain that's not locally derived content. It's coming from other sources in different locations. So it's definitely changed how people are using ThinManager. and what they're looking for in the way of seeing things on a thin client compared to years past.
It's interesting. We in the Viz Road shows we've been doing, there's been a lot of conversation about IT and OT convergence. Over the years that you've been working with ThinManager, have you seen any type of title changes between how OT and IT work together, and how ThinManager kind of plays into that? Does it help that relationship between OT and IT, or does it make it more challenging?
I think it helps as far as just the direct IT-OT relationship, because it does give both parties a way of understanding the needs of the other if they're willing to look at it that way.
Right.
But to your earlier point, IT and OT, they're the convergence, if you will, that's happening, and it's definitely there. The conversations that now we get that we're having with customers, more often than not, IT is definitely involved. Whereas if you look back, I don't know, even 6 years ago, most of the initial conversations we would have, or maybe even the only conversations we would ever have, were simply OT related. We didn't really talk a ton with IT, because generally what we would hear from the perspective of the OT personnel would be like, well, I'm just going to have my IT guy spin up my image, but I'm managing it from that point forward. Well, now that's completely shifted, and maybe not for all of the customers that are out there, but you see a big shift where now IT definitely is a part of the whole entire process, because they're looking at all of the different security aspects, cybersecurity, those kind of things, access. They're just much more heavily involved than they were in the past. So there's a lot more in the way of conversation. And I still try to encourage when I'm having the conversations, primarily because of my vast experience that I had working with customers and things. I try to encourage the IT sector to treat their OT colleagues as their customers, right? Because that's ultimately what they are in any shape, form, or fashion. They're another group of people that they're trying to enable, success with what they're doing.
Well said.
And that's their job. So, and sometimes IT gets a bad rap for, people just think they're trying to control. And I can understand where that does come from, because they are trying to control, but it's not meant to be done in I think if you talk to them one-on-one, and realize they're not doing it to just really control you. They're doing it to safeguard the data, the intellectual property, all those kind of things. They're doing it from that perspective. And sometimes that's, I think, where sometimes that oil and waterish kind of environment sometimes can play in, is because they don't always understand on either side what the needs are and why, and that's where it takes that communication. But I would definitely say it's significantly better than it was. There's not the same separation that there had been, but there still is a good bit of a learning curve that's out there, because there's a number of different organizations where their IT department still don't completely understand what the OT environment is, and they haven't done enough internal investigation sometimes to understand what those needs are. But you can tell when they have, because when they have, they are 100% in lockstep together. That you hear those IT people, they're asking their OT counterparts, "Hey, does this work for you?" And then vice versa, you hear the OT guy saying, "Does this meet our security needs?" There's a lot more collaborative conversation now than what there had been, where it was kind of like this very separation of church and state kind of thought process almost.
Right. Fantastic.
Excuse me. Are we seeing more, like, from a training standpoint? Do you see more IT people getting trained on ThinManager, going through certification trainings or road shows and stuff, as opposed to just SIs and just product sales? Are we seeing more network administration and stuff like that actually learning about ThinManager than we used to?
There's probably a little bit of an uptick, but I would have to be honest and say that most of the people that we still, and the training offerings that we have, are generally going to be more SI focused. That's the majority of what we train as SIs. And the other landscape, as far as distribution and those kind of things, but specifically with customers, if you look at a customer base, and if we're doing something specifically for them, more often than not, the larger percentage of the people that are going to be getting trained are going to be from that OT landscape, if you will. And you might have, let's say, if of a group of 10, you might have 10 to 20% of that that's representing it from an IT perspective. So they generally aren't being trained a whole lot, because if you think about it, ThinManager still, at the core of what it is still a very OT centric solution. That doesn't mean that there's not a place for IT to understand and learn, but probably most of the IT guys, when they get in there and they see what's going on, it doesn't take a whole lot for them to grasp the concepts, and they're not needing to interface with it daily. Mm-hmm. They just need to know, what ports do I need to have open? How is this communicating from one place to the other? Can we use RD Gateway? Can we do, they're just asking all of these different questions from a security and data flow scenario. But since ThinManager is generally going to be used more from your OT perspective, and that's where the hands-on day-to-day is, that's generally probably where most of your training takes place, is from that perspective, from the actual customer side of things. But more often than not, most of our training is empowering and helping those systems integrators learn more about ThinManager and whatnot. In our System Integrator program, and I think you guys can speak to this even more so than I can, but just because you probably see the numbers more readily than I do, but the System Integrator program has continued to grow and grow and grow over the past number of years. So I would say it's probably where a large percentage comes from right now.
Yeah, I was just thinking, as more and more people are using disparate systems and trying to get more and more analytics and outside content, like how much that has changed, having to, I don't know, I guess open things up while still keeping it secure. I guess I would think that IT would be getting more and more involved, but with a well-trained system integrator, that probably, offsets that a bit as well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I'm not saying that the people within the certain organizations with their IT don't get involved and they are definitely a part of a lot of the conversations in the very beginning. But once the rubber meets the road and, the systems are turned on and they're actually starting to function, generally the most you start hearing from the IT people at that point in time is if there's a technical issue or reason why something isn't functioning the way they need it to. Or they're having high bandwidth utilization or something along those lines. It's generally not so much specifically related to configuring and utilizing ThinManager, but just making sure that the content that ThinManager is trying to make sure is accessible for a thin client. That we're defining these display clients for this terminal to actually use. You just need to make sure that communication path is open, in that two-way street that it needs to be or whatever to be able to get that content. So in that respect, that's generally where you see them kind of coming back and re-engaging and maybe asking a few more questions, but they're generally not the ones that are configuring anything. They're just generally ones in the background playing that supporting role and helping the process.
Yeah, and they do maintain the security of the users in the network, and we just simply sync
correct
with that Active Directory. So that's one great thing about it. It's like you said earlier, we give ways for IT to get involved at the level they need to be and have the understanding that they need to have. And then at that point, the Active Directory syncing and whatnot goes a long way toward them feeling like, okay, this can be handled now by OT, and we've done our part. And unless something changes, this should be good to go.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because we have continued, if you look at some of the development that the development team has done within the ThinManager product itself over the past few years, you can point to a number of different things that are the underpinnings of ThinManager, if you will, the background stuff, the stuff that as a customer, you don't look at it as being this really cool feature, but there's a lot of those pieces and components that we've done in the background that are much more IT centric than they had been in the past. Specifically, just like what you talked about, Tom, that AD synchronization, right? Mm-hmm. the ability that we have now to be able to, get content and, work with RD Gateway, Remote Desktop Gateway, those kind of things. Those are things in the past that we didn't do, but at the request of certain customers and their IT personnel, because of the security that they wanted to implement, there's a lot of those things that became more mainstream for us to discuss and put in as features or capabilities for ThinManager to do. So if you look at even our development and what we've done has been merging those two environments and trying to make sure that everybody can work happily together. Because at the end of the day, it's the customer's got to be able to maintain their intellectual property, manage and create the product that they're doing, that all while maintaining that security overall.
Indeed.
Well, so Todd, let me ask you this. You talk about like talking with customers when they're originally talking about implementing a ThinManager setup. If somebody, ThinManager is one of those things that's like you got to see it to believe it. And obviously, there's different options during the year to see ThinManager demonstrated. But if anybody's listening who wants to see ThinManager and have it demonstrated and kind of start those conversations, where do they start?
Well, the first place I would tell them to go is to their local distributor. Most of the distributors, if not all of them, they should have what are called Mr. Demo Kits. And that allows our distributors out there to actually demonstrate the product themselves if they want to and whatnot. But let's say the main sales contact that they have at that distributor doesn't have access to that demo kit at that point in time. Obviously, they can always reach out to one of our sales resources, such as Keith or Jamie and those kind of things. And even beyond that, if they're not able to help, we have the ability within our business unit. As you guys know, we have our webinar room and we can do demos from there too. But it does perform better, if you ask me, to be able to do a demo in person with someone versus the web. But even doing it via the web is still better than just talking about PowerPoint slides and whatnot. So anytime you can actually get to see the product, as you said earlier, seeing is believing. It's kind of seeing ThinManager in action just opens your eyes so much more than just simply talking about it. Because when you're talking about it, you can get lost in the technical words that you hear, and sometimes things don't click. But the minute you start seeing it in action, it's amazing how quickly the gears start spinning in people's minds. I mean, when I recently had the opportunity to do an in-person demo for the first time in probably almost a year or more for a customer here, it was fun because I got to watch their faces, right? And that's the part I think that's kind of cool, is when you're doing that and you're engaging with them, they're asking those questions, you can see when things start clicking, and then they start becoming more invested in what they're seeing and asking more. And can it do this? And if I wanted to do this, can I also do it? So it opens up that conversation, and that's what you want it to do. Because there's so many things under the hood of ThinManager that even when we do our standard, kind of scripted demonstration, which still probably takes about an hour to an hour and a half to really accomplish to do those things, we barely scratched the surface of ThinManager and what all it can do. So I love the ability to be able to do an in-person demonstration anytime we possibly can. But obviously within our team of commercial engineers, there's no way we can be all over the country doing those kind of things. So that's where we really have to rely on our distributors out there to be able to do that. And like I say, they have access to the Mr. Demo Kits. And, beyond that, like I said, we have the ability to do webinars and things like that too. So there's a lot of opportunity for them to be able to see a demo of ThinManager.
Yeah. And I know we've all been working hard to kind of increase the videos that are out there for people to see specific features and all that kind of stuff. But you're right. I mean, an actual demo video is lengthy, so it's much easier to see and ask questions in person. And
because when you're doing it just as a kind of, I won't call it completely abstract, but when you're sitting there just talking and you're just going through the motion, unless the customer really feels comfortable or not, and it really does. And so I try to encourage them to ask questions, even interrupt me when I'm doing them, because I'd rather keep it, engaging and not just a one-way street. But if there's something different sometimes about being in person, I don't know what it is, but they'll see something. They watch my hands doing certain things while they're seeing the screen changing, and it clicks differently sometimes than when you're just doing it over the web. That's not to say that the web can't still be a very valuable delivery mechanism of a demo, but I still think just an in-person demo far surpasses that, if at all possible.
No, I get that. And I've watched, I think even with, Rock Live, I watched your demonstration, and it's a great demonstration. Don't get me wrong, but if you're able to ask the questions and be there in person, obviously you can start to see your own installation and your own, needs much easier.
Yeah.
Well,
I would agree 100%.
Yeah. So let me ask you just, stories from Todd. Like what, as far as installations and stuff go, what about like terminal count? What's the biggest installation you've been part of?
Well, me personally being part of or trying to help support in the background, those kind of things, probably somewhere around, I think it's probably 1,500 to 1,600 thin clients.
Wow.
So yeah, not a small one.
Not too shabby.
I'd be interested to actually like look at the ThinManager interface when you're running 1,500.
You don't want to look at it. It's a lot to look at.
I just see like a lot of groups, because without the groups,
that's the only way to manage it now. And think about this: they were a customer prior to us having groups.
I was going to say, yeah.
So imagine trying to scroll through that list of terminals before grouping became a possibility, and the tree's just forever long.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, so they're probably one of the largest. We have a lot of other. It's really interesting. You get to, when you look at the ThinManager installs, a lot of people will go, well, what's your standard size install? Well, that's kind of changed a lot over the course of years. But we used to always say between 5 and 10 would be a pretty standard scenario. But then when you have to look at that, it's not always just 5 and 10 period and you're done. It's like 5 to 10 of those over hundreds of locations, or maybe at a location, maybe they have a number of different thin servers stood up and they have 5 to 10 that are being managed in that facility as a whole. Just like let's think about a steel mill or something like that. They've got a lot of different disparate areas, but they still want to use ThinManager in each one of those environments. So they're still managing a number of different devices, overall within that larger plant location when you look at who they are. But maybe each system's smaller. But it's just, you really kind of have to dissect when you ask somebody or talk about total count. Is that from one server? Is that from multiple servers? What is it?
Yeah.
But that the great thing about how we do licensing now is it gives customers tons of opportunity now to really hone down how they want to do things.
That's pretty neat. Well, from a location standpoint, and you talk about global installs, like how many locations have you come across that a customer has like within one total ThinManager install?
Oh gosh. I don't know if I can give you an easy number.
There are dozens.
Oh yeah, easily dozens. There's certain customers that have, just within the U.S. alone, they probably have, 10 or 15 different locations, and that's not even talking global. Then you get over to EMEA, Asia Pac, whatever, and it just keeps, growing and growing and growing. So we get certain customers that, it's not uncommon because we're here in the U.S. for us to start working with the customer here in the U.S. first, and it kind of gets everything moving, and then they decide they want to roll this out globally, right? So then that becomes a standardized software that they're going to use across all of their facilities. So depending upon the customer, they may have 10 or 15 different plants here in the U.S., but then you look at what they may have over in EMEA, over in Asia Pac, whatever it may be, and you're now talking another 40 or 50 different locations. So it can expand really quickly once people start once they decide that they want to standardize on utilizing ThinManager. So and that even presents its own challenges too, just because you've got just different in the past, the way some of these places operated. They kind of made their own decisions and did their own things. And now globally, you're now saying, well, this is now what you're going to do. So now you have to train all of those people to do something that they never really intended on doing to begin with, because now it's from a corporate standpoint, this is what we're going to do. It's basically an edict that has come down and said, this is now how we're going to do our processes. So that we do end up engaging a lot of training with that kind of stuff too. Wrapping back some of that training discussion, that's where some of that kind of stuff comes back in, is when there is a global deployment.
I could see that too, depending on just within ThinManager, how you want to organize and group and kind of do your interface. There's probably a few different ways that people could do it, that, different strokes for different folks as far as how they do an entire global installation like that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it just there's a lot of, and I guess what I'm saying is, when I was kind of getting at some of the challenges, is the way certain processes are done, maybe in one region, they have to make sure that how those things are done in one region if any changes they make, they don't want to do anything that now changes the workflow or how they've been doing things in another region, just because of some of the differences in how they've gone about doing things. And it could be specific based off of, just that plant location and the facility itself and the capabilities it has, may make that location have to go about doing things and from a setup standpoint, a little bit different than another location, and just the overall process. So, for example, one of the customers we have, for a long time, they were having some ways they were trying to do things in a portrait mode, and they were wanting to get certain dashboards to be presented the way they want them presented. Now we've come up with some other ways to do that and improve upon that for them. And so those kind of things are going to get passed across everything globally, but some of these other locations globally weren't even using that. So this is going to be a new thing for them, not an improvement, just something completely new. Mm-hmm. So sometimes some of the things that we do and some of the things that get suggested based off of one methodology end up becoming a benefit for someone else later on. But then that can also be just the converse of that. It could be something we didn't anticipate on the opposite end, because we weren't originally working with that other plant. So then we have to kind of go back and make sure that we've covered all of those things. So that's why it's really important in the very beginning that there's a lot of those site surveys that are kind of done. What's the equipment that's actually being used? What are the processes that are being done? Does this line up with everything else we've already done? Or are there any, little one-offs or nuances at this location or that location that we need to take into consideration before rolling this out?
Right.
So,
I guess I could see that with a lot of projects, get all the information up front, because it's much easier to do it to start than try to implement later and change. So,
yep. And inevitably, occasionally you'll get one or two here and there that, something gets left out because it's so obscure. People know about it, but don't think about it. And so, that can happen, but it's not that often, but it does happen.
So before I let you go, you talked a little bit about training, just for people listening, like if I guess, what are some of the different avenues people can go to start? I mean, we talked about seeing ThinManager, but if they want to start learning ThinManager, what do you think's a good way to get started and then maybe even get more advanced with what you know?
Well, I mean, we have a number of different offerings, obviously, within our environment of what we can do. Yeah, there is, from a customer base, we've been offering for the past little while the ability for customers to do what's called a 2-hour basic training, if you will, and it just allows them to kind of get their feet wet in the product. It's all web based. It's all in the cloud. That's one methodology from a customer standpoint. But if the customers are wanting to do more than that, there is the ability for them to actually engage a resource and potentially have someone come on site or them go to a distributor location and get trained in that respect. But let's say you're not a customer, meaning, and when I say customer, I mean end user. So let me be very specific, because different people use the word customer a little loosely or a little bit more from their viewpoint. But like, let's say you're a systems integrator. Once again, we have a lot of those similar kind of offerings. We do things in conjunction with our distributors, where we can offer systems integration training, where they're kind of hosting and inviting a number of the systems integrators in their area to come participate in the training. Still, at this point in time, we're doing these all cloud-based. We have an Amazon Web Services environment that we do all of our cloud-based trainings through. And once again, we have a completely different lab environment for them than we might do or use for an end user, and those kind of things. So we have those offerings that are out there. But let's say a customer was wanting to get more than just the 2 hour. Like I say, there are our opportunities there. We do, and if a customer wants to, we have lab manuals that we could give to them, and it would basically just give them a ability to kind of, if they want to, somewhat recreate what we've done. The hard part is we've already created all of the actual operating systems, the virtual machines for our lab environment, that they would have to try to recreate themselves. So unless they're really tech savvy, that might be a little bit of a challenge for some customers. But that is another way of doing it. Obviously, our users manuals, although it's a gazillion pages long, was it 600 or 700 pages? I don't remember how many pages it is. It's a lot, but it is very good. I mean, it's a really good, thorough way of going through things and setting things up. But if I were to, make recommendations as far as depending upon who we're talking about, if we're talking systems integrators, like I say, there's a lot of different ways they can do it through the different distribution channels that we have. We have distributors basically sign up for certain time slots. They offer it to those areas and trying to get people in there. We also have the ability to do it, where we could host it ourselves for somebody. We do that somewhat with our friends down in Latin America. They will get a certain region, kind of like a distributor would here in the States, but it's actually the Rockwell channel itself down there, the actual business units down there. They will actually get those people together and we'll get a team together. But even if somebody doesn't see something on our calendar or whatnot, they can always reach out, to us and say, hey, is there an opportunity that we could get trained, or I'm looking to get trained, whether this is customer or systems integrator, and we can help find a solution for them, whether that's through the distribution channel that's already currently out there or through one of our partners, or even potentially directly with us. It just would depend upon when, resources, all those kind of things as to how we might be able to do that kind of stuff. But those are a number of different ways we have.
Right. And I mean, pre-pandemic, I know we did a lot more in-house training and face-to-face stuff. And maybe, hopefully we'll get back to that.
There's some changes that are taking place that might allow for some of those kind of things. But, we've kind of worked through some of the safety guidelines that are out there for everyone to make sure that those things get presented in a way that both are agreeable to, whether it's an end user or the SIs or whatever, to make sure that they feel confident and comfortable in the environment that we have. So the web-based training is still it's unlike in-person. I still kind of like doing in-person demos. I think in-person training still is far superior to web-based training, but the web-based training is still much better in that cloud environment than somebody just trying to take a manual and figure it out on their own.
Yeah, it's probably a lot more daunting just to dig through those, like we said, multi-100-page manual and try to figure everything out than having somebody show it to you. And I was going to mention for our listeners, if you go to the contact page at ThinManager.com, we actually have Todd's contact information listed, and you can actually email him or bug him. He doesn't really do that much, so he's happy to have you annoy him, because he's not really.
I apparently don't do much because I'm talking to you guys right now. So,
you're spending an hour of your day just talking. So it's kind of like doing a demo, only probably less fruitful. Well, Todd, thank you so much for coming on.
My
I think it
pleasure.
was a long time coming, and you're always very, very insightful and know the product better than, well, just about anybody. So thank you very much.
Glad to be here, guys. Thanks anytime. Appreciate it.
Tom, do you have any final questions or anything you want to ask Todd before we wrap it up?
No, I'm good. I think it'd be worth mentioning that there is the self-paced training out there as well that a lot of the SIs can do, and it's of course been more popular during these challenging times of physical distancing and whatnot, and people not being able to travel to the kind of trainings that we talked about today that we normally like to do. So just to let everybody know there are options out there. Just go to thinmanager.com/training. You can see what's available and find links into our partner portal and things like that. So I just encourage everybody to engage with us online if they need more information.
Absolutely. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. Todd, I'll let you go, and we'll do it again soon.
Sounds good. See you guys.
Thanks, Todd.
If you like this episode, please click the subscribe button and subscribe to The Plant for a discussion on emerging automation technologies. For more information on ThinManager, please visit thinmanager.com from any of your devices. I'm your host, Brian Harned, and we hope you can join us next time on The Plant.